The biggest story in the news right now is the ongoing escalation of tensions with Iran and the fact that it's it's not at all clear whether or not we're going to be having a conflict with Iran uh, in the very near future. And it's a scary situation. It's something that's sort of been a long time coming. I mean, it's not really a new issue. It's something that we've been dealing with since really the Bush administration, to be honest with you. But it's just something that recently has been ratcheted up to a whole new level. Obama tried to deal with Iran diplomatically and engaged in the whole nuclear agreement. But not Bush, Trump had different ideas and decided to basically tear that up and say we're not going to abide by it, which basically gave Iran no incentive whatsoever to abide by it, and allowed for the increasing escalation of tensions. And basically, what it appears to be right now is that both sides are sort of preparing for conflict. Whether or not a conflict's going to happen, they want to be prepared, and Iran is giving every indication that they have no inclination to back down. That they don't want a conflict, but if a conflict should arise, they're going to meet us on the battlefield and try their best to hold their own. Now, I have to imagine that they understand implicitly that they don't have any shot in hell at beating the United States in a war. I'm thinking the only leverage and the only hand that they have to play right now by not wanting to back down is basically not to get pushed over, not to just let us boss them around without any negotiation process. Basically, their leverage is that they understand what a terrible situation it's going to be for us if we end up going to war with them, even though we would undoubtedly win the war the same way that we won in Iraq. I mean, army to army, we're going to beat them. The problem is what comes afterwards. If we're going to invade and overthrow their regime, we've already seen that's the difficult part, is the aftermath of trying to rebuild and reestablish order in the region afterwards. This was the major problem that we had in Iraq, and it's why we were there for so many years, because we defeated their army relatively quickly. But we left a unstable and chaotic situation in the aftermath, obviously. So I think a lot of us have learned the lesson of Iraq, and a lot of us just instinctively don't want this war. And I think Trump might be in that camp, to be honest with you. He campaigned on no more foreign wars, and I don't think he actually wants a war with Iran. At the same time, Trump has this conflicting interest of wanting to appear tough with Iran. This is why he tore up the nuclear agreement. This is presumably why he okayed an airstrike that he just called off at the last minute, which I don't know if that was the plan from the get-go. We were just going to give them a little scare and then call it off, or if he actually changed his mind for whatever reason. I think it was a disaster one way or the other. It just does nothing but make us look weak. It makes us look like we're all bark and no bite, which right now we are, because the consequences of going to war with Iran are just not worth whatever it is that we have to gain from that. But at the same time, we can't afford to look completely powerless. That undermines our geopolitical strategy worldwide and in the Middle East. And so we sort of have tied ourselves to having to act in ways that we maybe don't want to act, just to uphold the image of we're still the world's biggest superpower and we're still calling the shots, and we're not going to let some rogue nation do what they want without consequence. And the fact that Iran is not a nuclear power yet, I think, is one of the biggest reasons why we seem to be more willing to play fast and loose with them than we were with North Korea or Russia or China or anybody else who we wouldn't think of going to war with, because it would be such a disaster. So basically, uh, right now, two of our biggest allies in the region, Saudi Arabia and Israel, seem very much adamantly they want to go to war with Iran. They've wanted a war with Iran for a long time. They don't like the regime. They want the regime overthrown. They don't seem particularly concerned about what the aftermath of that's going to be, because they're not going to be the ones stuck with the bill and stuck with the task of cleaning it up. And so they basically want us to go to war with Iran for them. They don't want to go to war with Iran themselves. Saudi Arabia, I don't know that they even could go to war with Iran, really. I mean, Iran's military is nothing compared to the United States, but compared to Saudi Arabia, I mean, they would have a fighting shot. The only thing is that Saudi Arabia has key strategic allies, such as the United States and now Israel, that would probably jump in if any conflict were to pop off, which is where they get their sort of security from, and their willingness to push this issue. If they knew that they were going to be the ones stuck, if they went to war with Iran, they were going to be stuck on their own fighting that, I don't think that they would even risk it whatsoever. Israel, I think Israel possibly could go to war with Iran and beat them, but they don't want to be tasked with that either, because it's going to be a massive project. You don't go and just bomb the shit out of them and it's just over, and then you pull your troops out and you're done. Once again, if you're toppling the regime, then you're tasked with the project afterwards of trying to nation build, which is where it becomes so costly and so difficult to manage. So it's going to be interesting. I'm hoping we don't get into a conflict with Iran. I'm hoping that it fizzles out, but there's just so many different ways that this can escalate into a war right now. Whether Trump wants one or not, he has people on his team that want war, first of all. But second of all, the Iranians are not backing down, and they could easily prompt a war through their own belligerent action that's going to prompt a response from the Trump administration, regardless of whether or not they actually want a war. So, shooting down that drone is one example, but it could easily get much more provocative than that. And so I don't know, I'm just hoping that the situation fizzles out. Like I say, I hope it doesn't escalate further. If it does, I hope that it's not a full-fledged invasion and toppling the regime. If it escalates to the point of strategic airstrikes, I think that's incredibly dangerous, because it has the potential to escalate further beyond that. This isn't Syria. We can't just go in and bomb them with impunity and think they're not going to do anything about it. There's a very real chance that would cause them to retaliate, and the situation would escalate further into a full-fledged war. If for whatever reason it turns into a war, I think it's ultimately going to be very unpopular for Trump. I think it's ultimately going to hurt his approval ratings overall in the long run, but in the short run, I think that it's possible it would help his reelection, because I feel like, just sort of instinctively or intuitively, and I could be wrong, that the American people would be much more queasy or much more nervous about changing administrations during the beginning of a conflict like that, especially going from the Republicans to the Democrats. The Republicans are just typically perceived to be more tough when it comes to things like this, and the fact that Trump is the incumbent would give him an inherent advantage in that. I mean, at the end of it, I think it would almost guarantee a Democrat in 2024, but the same way that Obama came in after 8 years of Bush, and it was a no-brainer that a Democrat was going to get in there. But keep in mind, the war in Iraq was very unpopular in 2004, and Bush still got reelected. So I don't know. I just have this feeling that if it did happen, it could work to Trump's benefit in the short term. In the long run, it would hurt his legacy immensely, and he would have the same sort of legacy that Bush has for starting the Iraq War. But yeah. it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. Hopefully it doesn't go much of anywhere.